Hi there, my name is Oliver. Tonight I will be reading chapters 12 and 13 of The Sword and the Chain, the second book of the trilogy, Guardians of the Flame, The Warriors. In these chapters, we rejoin Karl and his crew just after Ahrmin's failed assassination attempt and the death of Fialt. Fialt was the first of the freed slaves of the valley to die, but will he be the last? Let's find out. Chapter 12. The Guardians of the Sword. I have been here before, but when or how I cannot tell. I know the grass beyond the door, the sweet, keen smell, the sighing sound, the lights around the shore. Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Karl stood at the warthog's bow, holding tight to the railing as the ketch lumbered slowly across the gently rolling sea toward the small inlet and the lagoon beyond. Overhead, the jib luffed merrily in the wind. Below, water foamed, splashed, and whispered against the hull. Gentle waves lapped against the sandy shore. High above, a slim-winged tern circled in the royal blue sky, then stooped to pluck a small fish from the blue water, bearing its wriggling prey away. Karl rubbed at his belly, once more enjoying the taut feel of a full stomach. It had taken him time to adapt to being at sea, but his body had made the adjustment, and in less time than it had taken before. Only 6 days of feeding the fish this time. If this goes on, in a few years I'll only be vomiting for the first few seconds I'm at sea. A vision of himself stepping on board, immediately vomiting, then smiling and feeling fine, rose up unbidden. He laughed out loud. Aya looked up at him, raising one eyebrow just the way Andy did. "It's nothing," he said. He reached into his pouch and drew out a half-dried orange, peeling it with his thumbnail. Popping a section into his mouth, he waved a hand at the shoreline. "Look familiar?" "Yes." First she nodded, then she shook her head. "But I don't see my house." "Little one, as I understand it, Melawei stretches out across about 200 miles of shoreline, with scads of inlets, beaches, islands, and lagoons. We're not going to bump into your hut." "Don't worry. It may take a few days, but we'll find it." Her forehead creased. "Are you sure?" Standing next to her, Raff elbowed the girl in the shoulder. "Karl promised, didn't he?" With a derisive snort, Raff elbowed Aya again. That had to be stopped, nipped in the bud. Not that the boy had done anything terrible, but the point had to be made. "Raff." "Yes, Karl?" "We don't hit the people we're supposed to protect." Aya looked up at him. "He didn't hurt me, Karl." "Doesn't matter. A man whose profession is violence must not commit violence on his own family or on his friends. You and I are supposed to watch out for Aya, protect her, not hit her or bully her." Raff thought it over for a moment. "How about you and Ahira? You and he threaten to hit each other all the time." "Think it through, Raff. We play at threatening each other. We don't actually hit each other. See the difference?" "Yes." The boy cocked his head. "But how about practice? We've all gotten bruises from you." He rubbed at his side. "Good point. That's instruction, not violence. Anyone can back out of practice at any time. That includes you, apprentice. No more training or no more hitting. Understood?" "Understood. I'll stay with the training." Raff turned back to the rail. Karl smiled his approval. A good kid. Raff took criticism and instruction as a lesson, not as a blow to his ego. At Gannis's shouted command, the helmsman brought the ship about again, maneuvering it between two outreaching sandspits. The hull rasped against a sandbar. The ship shuddered free and swung into the placid water of the lagoon. Karl shook his head. No wonder the hull was as watertight as a sieve, if this was the way Gannis treated it. Even given Gannis's explanation that the Mel would deal with a ship only after it had grounded itself, there had to be a simpler way than bouncing the boat across sandbars, until it got stuck at low tide in the lagoon. Still, Gannis's seamanship and his confidence in it were noteworthy. On this side, there was no moon, and the weaker solar tides made for only a slight difference between high and low water. It took guts for Gannis to dare a deliberate grounding. Breaking free would be tricky. Karl turned to Ahira, noting that the dwarf's one-handed grip on a cleat of the forward mast wasn't quite as casual as Ahira tried to make it seem. A casual grip didn't leave the knuckles white. "Any problem?" Ahira didn't turn around. "No." Karl switched to English. "Hey, it's me, remember? James, are you okay?" "I'm fine. I just don't like it when the boat jerks around." Another bump swung Karl around, sent his hands flying back toward the railing as the ship rocked once, then fell still, grounded. Aya and Raf exchanged indulgent smiles over Karl's poor sense of balance. "Look, kids, when you've got a couple 100 pounds of mass to carry around, it isn't as easy to keep upright as it is for you." But never mind. Let them have a few private chuckles. He scanned the shore, trying to see if there was anyone or anything in the dense greenery. Nothing. Gannis had said that the locals would meet them, but... "Karl?" Ahira's voice held a hint of amusement. "Yes?" "Don't turn around for a second. I've got a question for you." Karl shrugged. "Sure." "This shoreline looks like Hawaii, no?" "I was thinking Polynesia." "Hawaii is part of Polynesia, Karl. And this is the same thing. Not Diamond Head. It looks more like Lahaina. Palm trees, sandy beaches, almost no rocks. Warm, blue water, even though it's fresh and not salt." "Right." Karl started to turn. "Hold it a moment," the dwarf snapped. He chuckled. "Now, given all of that, when the natives show up, you wouldn't be surprised if they were paddling dugout canoes. Outrigger types, would you?" "It wouldn't surprise me at all." A similar environment would tend to produce similar artifacts. The simplest, most convenient road, and hunting ground for that matter, would be the sea. If the Mel didn't have the resources to build large sailing ships, they would build canoes. And if they didn't have animal skins or birch bark to build the canoes with, they'd have to make dugouts. Dugout canoes were inherently more unstable than other sorts, therefore outriggers. All logical. "Is that what this is? The natives have dugouts?" "It makes sense to you, right?" "Right." "Then turn around and tell me why their canoes look like miniature versions of Viking longboats." Karl turned. 3 canoes floated in the lagoon's mouth, each 5 or 6 yards long, with an outrigger mounted on the port side, each manned by oarsmen, and each with a wooden carving of a dragon's head rising from the prow. After checking on Carrot and Pirate in the hold, Karl climbed back on deck. He gathered Ahira, Ea, Chak, Raf, and Tenedy around him, keeping the group well away from Gannis and the 3 sarong-clad Mel, who were busy at the bow, haggling over the price of Melawei copra and Endel steel. The locals spoke Arendra with a curiously lilting accent, far different from the flat half-drawl of Matrail, or the clipped speech of Pandathaway. A familiar accent. "Hey, Karl." Ahira looked up at him. "You hear it too?" "I sure do. You got any explanation of why these folks talk like the Swedish chef?" Chak frowned. "It might help," he said, scowling, "if you would either teach me this English of yours, or just keep your conversation in Arendra, at least when I'm around." "Good idea," the dwarf nodded. "I'll give it a try." Karl gestured an apology. "We were talking about the accent these Mel have. It sounds familiar, like something from home." "Home?" Ralph shook his head. "Not my—" "Our home." Karl waved his hand aimlessly. "The other side. A region called Scandinavia." That was very strange. Differences between here and home were to be expected. He had grown used to them. On the other hand, coupled with the dragon-headed canoes, the familiarity of the local accent was vaguely frightening. It had to mean something. But what? It couldn't be just a transplanting, as had happened with their group. After all, the Mel didn't look like Scandinavians. Not at all. Their hair was black and straight, their skin dark. They had slight epicanthic folds around their eyes. Chalk shook his head. That doesn't make sense. I thought you were the only ones to cross over. That's what I thought too. The largest of the Mel, a deeply tanned, broad-shouldered man in a purple sarong, walked over. His lined face was grim as he stopped in front of Karl, planting the butt of his leaf-bladed spear on the deck in front of him. Are you from Ahrmin? He asked, his accent still sending chills up and down Karl's spine. Has he sent for the sword? Karl shook his head. I'm sorry, but I don't understand. The Mel gave a slight shrug, as though that was the answer he had expected, but it had disappointed him nonetheless. Aver Gannis, he said, says that you are a man from a land strange to him. He says that your name is Karl Cullinane, and that you are someone for whom the slavers have offered a large reward. Is this true? I'm not sure whether it's the slavers or the whole guild's council that's offering it, but you're close enough. Karl nodded, gesturing to Chalk to take his hand off the hilt of his sword. This didn't sound like a prelude to an attack, and even if it was, the Mel still in the boats were too far away. Karl, Tenedy, Chalk, and Ahira could easily handle the 3 spearmen on board. Yes, it's true. And why do they hunt you? The Mel's face was flat, unreadable. 3 reasons. First, I freed a dragon that Pandathway kept in chains. Second, I killed slavers and a wizard who hunted me for doing that. Third, it's my profession to kill slavers and free slaves. And there's a 4th reason, it seems. One, at least one, of the slavers has made it a personal matter. He laid a hand on Aya's shoulder. This is Aya, one of your people. We have brought her here, home. I see. And if slavers were to raid Melawei while you are here? Before Karl could answer, Chalk snickered, drawing his thumb across his throat, sucking air wetly through his teeth. Karl nodded. The Mel's face became even grimmer as he slowly rotated his spear, planting the point deeply in the wood of the deck until the spear stood by itself. Placing his calloused hands on Karl's shoulders, he drew himself up straight. I am Sagar Wotansen, wizard and war leader of Clan Wotan. Will you and your friends do me the honor of guesting with Clan Wotan while you are in Melawei? Karl looked past Sagar Wotansen's shoulder to Gannis, who stood open-mouthed in amazement, and down to Aya, whose eyes grew wide. Clearly, this wasn't the standard way to greet visitors from other countries. Back when he was minoring in Anthro, Karl had learned something of the vast range of acceptable behavior, and the way it varied from society to society. But the notion of host and guest was close to universal. Except for the Yanomamo, of course, the only culture known by the anthropologists who studied them as those bastards. The Mel didn't seem like a this-side version of Yanomamo. Wotansen stood silently, waiting for Karl's answer. I am honored, Karl said, and we accept. Wotansen dropped his hands and ran to the railing, calling down to the men in the dugouts. There are guests of the clan here, who require help with their animals and baggage. Why do you just sit there? Aya let out a deep breath. What is it? Karl asked. Glad to be home? She shook her head. No, it's not that. Why? Afraid I'd turn him down and hurt his feelings? The girl shook her head. If you'd turned him down, he would have had to try and kill you. Ahira cleared his throat. I think we'd all better be careful with our pleases and thank yous, no? Setting down his wooden mug on the grass-strewn floor, Sagar Wotansen sat back on his grass mat, leaned on his elbows, and shook his head. He sighed deeply. An acceptable meal, guests of my clan? Not acceptable, Karl smiled. Excellent. The others echoed him as they reclined on their mats. The guest house of Clan Wotan was the largest of the 17 huts in the village, and the most luxurious. It was a long, low structure, somewhat like a bamboo version of a Quonset hut. The wrist-thick poles that formed the framework bent overhead, rising to about 6 feet at the center. Long, flat leaves were woven among the closely spaced poles. The light wind dryly whistled through them. There was no fireplace in the hut. The slightest spark could easily set it aflame. Their dinner of grilled flatfish and deep-fried balls of coconut milk had been cooked over the fire pit, 20 yards in front of the open end of the guest house, the food brought in on plantain leaves. The cook, and a good one at that, had been Estali, the younger of Segar Watansen's wives. She was a slim, attractive girl who looked to be about 16. Now she knelt attentively beside Watansen, the hem of her sarong tucked chastely under her knees, while her naked breasts bobbled above, refilling his mug from a clay jug of fermented coconut juice, while Watansen's 7 sons and daughters served Karl and the rest. Watansen's other wife, Olaila, a hugely pregnant woman in her late 30s, presided over the tail end of the meal from the single piece of furniture in the hut, a cane armchair. Illumination was provided by 7 head-sized glowing stones, each suspended in an individual net bag hung from the center pole that ran lengthwise down the roof of the hut. The light from 3 of the stones had begun to fade. Watansen had spent much of the meal reassuring Olaila that his promise to refresh the spell still stood, and that he would do so tomorrow. Her knowing smirk said that this wasn't the first time he had made that promise. Understandable. Life in Melawei was lazy and easy. It would always be tempting to put work off to tomorrow. Karl had another swig of the coconut juice. It was dry and crisp, like a light Italian wine. But how did they get it so cold? He shrugged. Well, if Romans could make ice in the desert, maybe the Mel could chill a bottle of wine. He looked over at Ea, who was sprawled out on her grass mat, sated after the heavy meal, half asleep. Good to be home, little one? She frowned. I'm not home yet. Watansen smiled reassuringly. We're not too far from Clan Eric, little cousin. No more than 2 days by sea. He closed his eyes tightly for a full minute. If your horses can take just a bit of water, you should be able to ride straight there, and in less time. We can start out in the morning. He shrugged. I've got to go that way myself. I'll need to arrange for Gannis's corpora to be picked up, and I'll have to visit the cave. Estelle reacted to the last 2 words as though she had been slapped. Segar? Hush. Remember Artemirdon's words. He will be a stranger from a far land. I'll have to take Karl Cullinane there, and if he's not the one, the sword can protect itself. It has before. That was the second time Watansen had brought up this sword. Karl spent a half-second debating with himself whether asking might offend the Mel. Then, what sword is this? Watansen shrugged. The sword. I wish Svenna, he was the clan speaker, hadn't been taken by the slavers. He could tell you the story word by word. He raised his head, though Clan Eric still has its speaker. Do you want to wait until you can hear it properly? To be honest, I'm itching with curiosity. Not particularly about this sword, though. What were a group of Mel men doing with Scandinavian names and Scandinavian accents? And more. The figureheads on the dugouts looked like the dragons on Viking longboats. They were stylized, almost rectangular, not saurian like Elegon. The huts were bamboo and cane versions of Viking lodges. That didn't make sense. A climate and environment similar to Polynesia could have given rise to a culture similar to the Polynesian culture, complete with loose wraparound clothing, outrigger canoes, and a loose and easy lifestyle based on the bounty of the sea. But where had the Scandinavian elements come from? It was possible that the dragon-headed canoes, or the accent, or the similarity of some of the names could have been a coincidence, but not all 3. Segar Watansen sat up, then drained his mug, beckoning to Estali for a refill. Very well. My father's father's father's... He knit his brow in concentration as he counted out the generations by tapping his fingers against his leg. Father's 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 father, Wotan Redbeard, was called a pirate, although he truly was a just man. He sailed his boat on a sea of salt as he raided the villages of the wicked landfolk, taking from them their ill-gotten grain and gold. As Watansen spoke, the children sat down on the mats, listening intently as if to a favorite, often-repeated bedtime story. He and his men would appear from over the horizon, beach their boat, and then... One of the little boys leaned over toward an older sister. How could they sail on salt? He asked in a quiet whisper. She sneered down at him, holding herself with an air of superiority possessed by older sisters everywhere. There was salt in the water. That doesn't make sense. Why would they waste salt by putting it in the water? He pressed. Father says salt is hard enough to find as it is. They didn't. It was already there. How? Hush, Father's talking. But this night was dark, and a storm raged on the sea, sending his ship leaping into the air, then crashing down into the troughs between the waves. Why didn't they just land? The boy nudged his sister again. She sighed. Because they were too far out at sea. Didn't they know they weren't supposed to go out of sight of land? I guess they forgot. And just as he thought that his ship would founder and sink, the sky cracked open around him, and the ship found itself on the quiet waters of the Sirik. But how did it get here? Weren't you listening? She gave him a cloud on the head. The sky cracked open. He rubbed at the spot where she had struck him. I've never seen that. You will if you don't be quiet. Standing at the prow was an old man. White-bearded he was, dressed in grey wizard's robes. Clutched tightly in fingers of light, a sword floated in the air over his head. I, Ahrmin, have saved your lives and brought you here, he said, in a tongue they had never before heard but somehow understood. To take this to a place I will show you. His voice was the squeak of a boy whose manhood was almost upon him, yet his face was lined with age. You and your children will watch over it, and keep it for one whom I will send. A man named Bjorn laughed. My thanks for the sword, he said, but I will take it for myself. As he sprang across the deck at the wizard, lightning leaped from the wizard's fingers, slaying Bjorn instantly. The boy looked up at his sister. Bjorn? What kind of name is Bjorn? An unlucky one, and a stupid one. Now hush! Brought them to the cave, and left the sword there, amid the writings that only two of them could see, and none of them could read. Watch for strangers, Ahrmin said. One day a stranger will come for the sword. But how will I know him? My many times great-grandfather asked. The wizard shook his head. You will not, and neither will your children, or their children. It is not yours to know, but to watch, and wait. The sword will know. How can a sword know anything? It's a magical sword, stupid. Accepted them gladly, and offered their daughters as wives. Wotanson raised his head. And so they settled down to an easier life, raised their children and grandchildren, down the 9 generations. He thumped his hand against his mat. And here we are. He tapped the jug. More juice? Ahira caught Karl's eye. What we've had has already gotten to my bladder. He elbowed Karl in the side. Oof, me too. If you'll excuse us for a moment. Did you catch all that, Karl? Seating himself on a waist-high rock, the dwarf drummed his heels against the stone. Karl's head swam. It made sense, but it didn't, all at once. I don't understand it. Part of it makes sense, but... What Wotanson had said boiled down to the sort of story a group of conquering Vikings might tell to their children and grandchildren. But 8? 9 generations? When were the Vikings? About 11th century, no? Ahira nodded. Something like that. And with the faster time rate on this side, if a bunch of 11th century Vikings crossed over, they should have been here for far more than 2 centuries. Karl nodded. That was what Dayton had said, and what they had observed. Their trip from Lundale to the Gate Between Worlds had taken a couple of months on this side, but when they had used the gate to return home, only a few hours had passed. Once, he had sat down with Lou Ricchetti to figure it out. For every hour that passed at home, about 400 or 500 flew by here. It can't be something as simple as Dayton lying, Karl said. No. The dwarf scowled. Dayton has lied to us more than once, but not this time. We know he was telling the truth. This time. The time rate is faster here, relatively. Maybe not. Karl shrugged. Maybe the time differential fluctuates. That'd explain some things. Like what? Think it through. Karl stamped his foot. Wish I'd had the sense to before. He gestured around them. If this side really was 400 times as old as Earth, that'd make it about 1,600 billion years old, no? It'd be that much more worn. Most of the atmosphere would have escaped, probably. All the mountains would have worn themselves down. Huh? Ahira's forehead furrowed. You're telling me that mountains wear out? Too much dry cleaning? Give me a break. Mountains tend to wear down just like anything else. The Appalachians are older than the Rockies, which is why they don't rise as high. Not anymore. In another couple billion years, they'll be the Appalachian Plains, if tectonic forces don't raise a whole new set of mountains. Entropy. The dwarf pounded his fist against the rock. Dayton lied again. Maybe. Maybe not. Karl shook his head. So the time differential fluctuates, but maybe Dayton didn't know that. After all, the time rate could have worked just the way he said it did during his whole life. He could have been telling the truth. I doubt it. The dwarf shook his head. I didn't think you caught it. Remember the wizard's name? Ahrmin? Sound familiar? Mirren. Well, that kind of sounds like Merlin. Karl shrugged. I guess it's possible that Ahrmin inspired the legends about Merlin. That wouldn't be surprising. He had already seen evidence that happenings on this side had leaked over the boundary between worlds. Elves, dwarves, wizards throwing bolts of lightning, the Silkies of the northern Cyric, the notion of fire-breathing dragons, the cave beneath Bremen that was echoed in the writings of Isaiah. No, or maybe, the dwarf corrected himself. But that's not the point. Remember how Wotansen described the wizard? White-bearded. His voice was the squeak of a boy whose manhood was almost upon him, yet his face was lined with age. Doesn't that sound like someone we know? And the name. Arthur Simpson Dayton. But he said that he had only seen this side, but never been able to bring himself across. That's what he said, Karl. Doesn't make it true. Karl shook his head. I don't see what this all adds up to. Me neither. The dwarf shrugged. And I've got a hunch we're not going to for quite a while. If ever. Unless you want to try and slip past the dragon again, then go quiz Dayton. I'll pass, thanks. Thought so. I don't see you volunteering. I'm not. Ahira flexed his arm, his biceps bulging like a huge knot. I like it here. No, I think we just keep thinking about it. Maybe Walter or Andrea or Lou Ricchetti will have some idea. Maybe Elegon knows more than he's telling. We'll just have to wait until we get back to the valley. Well, what do we do in the meantime? Ahira smiled. That's easy. We live. Eat, breathe, kill slavers. All the usual stuff. Karl snorted. Well, let's get back inside then. Got a lot to think about. Ahira raised a finger. There is one more thing we'd better do. Yes? I think we'd better have a look at this sword of Wotansen's. Right. Chapter 13. The Scourge. Her beams bemocked the sultry main, like April hoarfrost spread. But where the ship's huge shadow lay, the charmed water burnt away, a still and awful red. Samuel Taylor Coleridge. I still say we should have taken them while they were at sea, Lencius muttered to Hinrid, his voice pitched so that Ahrmin could hear him, but only barely. Lencius shook his head, his long, greasy ringlets of hair waggling in counterpoint. And we would have, were I in charge. Hinrid nodded. That's what Gerald thought, too. I know, Enough! Ahrmin's fingers tightened on the hilt of his sword. Lencius and Hinrid fell silent. Ahrmin sighed. The fiasco at the dock hadn't done anything to improve his standing with his 37 remaining men. What had once been only a silent resentment had become open doubt, sometimes verging on mutiny. But that didn't matter. Only one thing mattered. So I failed Karl Cullinane. This first time. That's not so important. Even Father couldn't beat you the first time. But it isn't the first time that counts, Karl Cullinane. It's the last time. He looked around the Scourge's cramped forward hold. Of the 30-odd faces, the only one that didn't bear a frown was Thyron's. The wizard held himself above both the sailors and slavers. In contrast to the grubbiness of the rest, the wizard's gray robes were clean and unwrinkled, his drawn face freshly shaved, his thin lips holding a disdainful smile. Ahrmin? Rake scratched at his head. I think we should consider letting this Karl Cullinane go. There's enough gold to be had picking up a few dozen mel. He rapped on the bulkhead behind him. Enough space in the hold for 150. 200 if we pack tightly enough. Ahrmin's irritation rose. He'd had enough of the tight-pack fanatic, of all tight-pack fanatics. It had been proved, over and over again, that there was more money to be made by delivering a smaller number of healthy slaves than by tight-packing them, chaining them all closely together in the hold, leaving them to stew in their own wastes during a sea voyage, having to throw away those who didn't survive, then treat the others with expensive healing drafts before a sail. Tight-packing was a particularly stupid way to handle Mel. Mel didn't take easily to their chains. Many would refuse to eat. Tight-packed, they could lose more than half of the slaves. Even loose-packed, the trip from Melawei to Pandathaway would kill 10, maybe 20% of the cargo, and leave the rest sick as dogs. Of course, they could always sell the surviving slaves as is. But in Pandathaway, or anywhere else along the coast for that matter, there was little demand for sickly slaves who had to be either healed or nursed back to health before they would be any use to their new owners. Tight-packing would kill much profit. Besides, tight-packing the women would remove one of the great joys of the profession. Ahrmin snorted. And what would you do? It would take several 10 days in a good port to refit the Scourge for tight-pack. Rake shrugged. It seems a bit late to point that out. We could have... Thyron cleared his throat. Rake fell silent. I believe that was Ahrmin's point, the wizard said. We're not in Pandathaway, nor are we in Lundale, or Port Salk, or even Evanor. To be precise, we're off the coast of Melawei. Even if you wanted to take the time and money to refit the slave hold, I doubt that the locals would be willing to help you. Fika spoke up, his low growl barely carrying over the rush of water. We could always make 'em help us. The wizard eyed him for a moment, then carefully spat in Fika's face. Fika reddened, but kept his white-knuckled fists at his side, not even daring to raise his hands to wipe the spittle from his cheek. The others near him turned their faces away, not wanting to be next. Fool, Thyron said, smiling gently. Who do you think I am? Grandmaster Lucius? Artemirin? I can easily hold off any one of these Mel wizards and his apprentices. I could probably take on 2, perhaps as many as 3. But if I were stupid enough to allow you to anchor the Scourge offshore for a 10-day, did you say? 2? We would quickly find the ship surrounded by every Mel wizard and apprentice that could run, paddle, swim, or crawl. There is a limit to how many spells I can intercept. Thyron rose. But enough of this nonsense. I have better things to do than listen to more squabbling. He rose and left, all of the men glaring in unison at the door as he closed it behind him. You would be able to dispel more if you didn't insist on keeping other spells in your head, wizard. Like your lightning bolt or flame spell, Ahrmin thought. But then you wouldn't be able to abuse everyone with impunity, would you? Then it occurred to him that Thyron had, albeit unknowingly, done him a favor. By acting as a lightning rod for the men's discontent, the wizard had given Ahrmin a chance to ingratiate himself with the others. But how? He thought for a moment, and an idea that had been in the back of his mind suddenly gelled. Rake, he said, you should trust me more. Rake's head snapped around. What? You assumed that I had no reason for not taking the warthog at sea. The other sneered. I know your reason. You want to take Cullinane alive. And you'd rather take a share of a much smaller reward? Never mind. There is another reason. One that will fatten all of our pouches as well. As much as a tight pack would if all the slaves survived. And? Rake leaned forward, interested. And my plan will ensure that we can come upon Karl Cullinane unaware. It will be tricky, granted, and we'll have to assume that Cullinane has business in Melawei that will take him at least a day's ride away from where they've beached the warthog. I'll be happy to share my idea, if you're interested. Ahrmin lay back on his bunk, cradling his head on his arms. But my major concern is Cullinane. If you don't mind foregoing some extra slaves, some extra coin. He closed his eyes. Wait! Another voice piped up. Don't keep it a secret, Master Ahrmin. He sat up, making sure that his smile didn't reach his face. Master Ahrmin, eh? I like the sound of that. Very well. Ahrmin nodded. The timing will be tricky, but I'm sure we can do it. He pulled the glass ball from his pouch, unwrapped the soft leather sheets that covered it. Ahrmin cradled the ball in the palm of his hand. It all depends on this. The finger floated in the center of the sphere, bobbing slowly in the yellow oil. From the finger's hacked-off stump, threads of tendon and shreds of skin waved gently, while the slim fingernail pointed unerringly toward the north. Listen carefully now. We'll lie offshore, out of sight, until we're sure that Cullinane has gone a fair distance away. Then... And that brings us to the end of Chapter 13. How much of what Dayton told them in the last book was truth, and how much was lies? What exactly is Ahrmin's plan? We'll find out in the next chapter, I'm sure. Thank you for listening. I apologize for the long break between uploads. I hope to get back on schedule and finish out this book and the third book of the trilogy in the coming weeks. I hope this part is as enjoyable to listen to as it was to make. Thank you again. Good night.